AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Briana MacWilliam, is back with us today to talk about attachment styles as narcissistic wounds, remembering the self. Briana is a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist with 15 years experience in the field. She has held 2 directorial positions in community-based and day treatment settings, and was a research outcomes coordinator to the executive team at Amen Clinics, Inc., a brain research and diagnostic agency. She has also edited and co-authored 2 books on the subjects of attachment, complicated grief, and working with the LGBTQ populations. Currently, she helps adults struggling with insecure attachment styles with her unique approach called the MacWilliam method. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Briana.
Hi, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, always great to see you. And I'm excited about another great topic today of conversation. So let's dive in. What would you say are the intersections between narcissism and insecure attachment styles?
Sure. Well, so understanding the origins of narcissistic wounding can really help us understand, why we might have been attracted to a narcissistic person in the first place. And usually that's because our disrupted attachment relationships are at the root of it, right? Both our attraction to these folks as well as their issues, right? Their narcissistic presentation. So understanding these origins can kind of help us create a context around our romantic experiences and sort of see things in a different light. And that's beneficial because it allows us to kind of separate ourselves from the stories of low self-worth or of blame that may have either been imposed upon us or that we have taken on, and instead start to adopt more of a healthy sense of identity and wholeness. So I'm going to take us back, a little storytelling, just take us back a little bit to kind of understand, like, where does the concept of narcissism even come from? And in the early studies of narcissism itself, Heinz Kohut found that children actually needed to have a healthy sense of what he called normal narcissism. So this is when a child starts to play with their imagination. They have kind of a grandiose sense of themselves, and they look to their parents to kind of validate those ideas. And if they receive positive regard from supportive parents, then that sort of inflated sense of self kind of naturally evolves, and it becomes more mature, it becomes more realistic, it becomes more integrated, just through the common natural challenges and crises that we butt up against in development. However, if we encounter very critical or demeaning parents, then that evolution becomes a bit twisted, right? That evolution can become kind of like a record scratch. So just to bring this home with a very concrete example, imagine that you have a child kind of zipping around the living room and they've tied a blanket around their neck and they're pretending to be Superman, right? And the child says, "Look at me, mommy, I'm Superman. Look at me fly. Look how strong I am," right? So this is what we might consider the grandiose self, the inflated self, right? The child is playing with these imaginative ideas about its capacities and capabilities. And so maybe the supportive parent in this moment says, "Hey, wow, look at you, big, strong Superman. Look at you go. Watch out for that chair," right? And so, they're expressing a kind of admiration for what the child is playing with quite naturally and innocently around their capacities. And so in that moment, the child lights up from their encouragement and they start to believe that I am capable of great things, right? And over time, normal limitations of life are going to spring up and they're going to realize, well, maybe I'm not capable of flying, But maybe great things could be translated into, tackling that difficult test I needed to take, or learning that new skill that I want to learn, or getting the job as an adult that I wanted to get, right? Or leaving a job and striking out on my own, right? So when we have that sort of healthy evolution and normal phase of narcissism, it evolves into a healthy sense of self-esteem. It evolves into believing we can do something even if we've never seen anybody else do it, right? That requires a certain degree of healthy narcissism. Now, what happens on the other end? Well, if we have critical parents or we have demeaning parents who see that child flying around the room and they bristle up and they say, they get red-faced and they get angry and they start yelling and they say, shut up, sit down, look at what your stupidity is doing to my rug. I don't want to hear from you unless spoken to, right? Now, of course, we're all going to have bad days. Of course, we're all going to snap, without meaning to and feel bad about it. But if this happens all the time, if there is never any room for that child to explore themselves, to play imaginatively, to experiment with these different facets of self and identity, then what happens is the child learns to distrust their own intuition. They learn to distrust play. They learn to be afraid of exploration, right? They start to squash their own creative impulses because it leads to feelings of shame or anger or guilt. And it starts fracturing the inner life. And depending on how severe that becomes, it can lead to feeling like you're not capable of great things, right? That you are selfish or downright offensive if you dare to look into your authentic self. Right. And so we look out into the world and we see people carving a path for themselves and we feel envy, or we feel judgment, or we feel hatred of them, or we feel afraid of them. Right. And so because that was how the creative, playful, imaginative, grandiose self within you was treated. So what happens is if the self can have a response to that. Right. And it can start to become inflated as like a defensive response, right? So it's not me, it's you. And then we have this villain and we have the hero emerging, right? There's no in between. Things are one way or the other, right? It's completely black or white. And and now criticism and judgment and you must be an arm of me. And we see all the sort of classic narcissistic things evolving. And this is what we call egocentric thinking. Piaget was a cognitive development theorist, and he called this egocentricity. So I'm sure you often hear the term ego being thrown around a lot. But in this context, what we're talking about is like a sort of negative response to that normal narcissism evolving, which is, if you think about it, a child, their immature way of making sense of the world is to assume that everything revolves around them, which means that they feel like they have a lot of power over the people, places, and things in their environments when they really don't. Mm-hmm. So for example, a child will reason, mom is angry, so I must have done something to upset her, so it must really be all about me. I must be bad. To make it right, I'm going to do good things and I'm going to make her happy and I'm going to prove that I am good, right? So this is when we become very approval seeking, validation seeking, right? So what happens in that moment if the parent does not empathize with the child's distress, but instead reinforces the idea that, yeah, you are bad, you are a burden, you're not enough, you're not measuring up to the standard of behavior or conditions of love that I have for you, right? So then that becomes internalized. This is what John Bradshaw called the wounded inner child, right? That becomes internalized as the wounded inner child. And then fast forward that sentiment 20, 30 years, all of a sudden it sounds like my husband is angry. I must have done something to upset him. So this is really all about me. Therefore, it's my fault. I have to fix it to earn his love back and feel worthy of it, right? So whatever input you are receiving, whether you are acting in service, whether the behaviors you're demonstrating are in service of the other or not, emotionally and energetically speaking, it's really about negotiating our mental and emotional proximity to the other, right? And how their energy or their energetic states or their emotions or their thoughts and feelings are defining ours. So in other words, you could appear to be actively helping other people, but it's still all about you, right?
Yes.
And this is a quintessential narcissistic wounding characteristic, right? And I say this, and it's important to understand, because if your goal is recovery, so to speak, it can leave you completely ungrounded with a totally abandoned sense of self and center, because you can't really see anybody else for who they are, because you're too caught up in trying to figure out how they are defining you. So it's a constant moving away from, right? And this is really the essence of what happens when we say that someone has a narcissistic wound at a young age. And when that happens, it evolves into things like attachment styles. And I talk about attachment styles as being, basically, they are archetypal patterns of coping with threats to our intimate relationships, right? So when we have that demeaning parent saying something negative to us, and we decide, ooh, that's not so good. Okay, I guess I'm gonna be in service of them, and I'm not gonna explore whatever this is, because that's shameful, offensive, scary, right? So what happens is, that moment you get a jolt of anxiety, and that jolt of anxiety is telling your nervous system and your limbic brain, the mom is mad at us. This is a threat to our survival, because if mom is mad at us and chooses to remove the roof over our head and the food from our bellies, we're not going to survive. So we have to figure out how close she wants us, how far away she wants us, how often that should happen, how we should show up in either circumstance, right? So all of that becomes our main preoccupation on an unconscious level, and then later it can become more conscious when you watch an interview like this. You're becoming conscious of it, right? So that's kind of how, now that threat, that jolt, people develop in the theory of attachment theory. They develop 4 sort of common ways of coping, and that is either through moving away from to create a safe distance, reaching for and clinging to make sure they don't leave you, right? Or sometimes there's no clear solution. Sometimes you have to be away, sometimes you have to be close, sometimes nothing eliminates the threat, so you have to play dead, right? And this is dissociation. So that's how it evolves, right? And so those are the 4 attachment style presentations, but then we also can see actually 4 subtypes of narcissistic presentation within that. So it gets very wounded, yes, but it also becomes very interwoven, is what I meant to say.
Yeah. So how does that break down, like the 4 types of narcissistic presentations within those types? How does that manifest?
Sure. So I'll explain the four presentations, and then I'll show you how it intersects. So the first one we would look at is sometimes called a prosocial or communal narcissist. And the like tagline we would give this is, look at all the great things that I've done for the world, right? So this is the type of narcissistic presentation that is probably the most amenable, is the one that we most like to be around, because they're very concerned with doing good things for people and making them happy. And usually they want it to be very, very public. They want it to be widely seen and acknowledged, because the more people that see and praise them for good works and good deeds, the more validation they receive. They're usually a lot of fun to be around. They want to be liked and appreciated by everyone. So they very intuitively sense what it is that you would want and need in order to provide that for you, so you feel a sense of admiration for them. They can be empathic. These are actually narcissists who can be very, let's say, emotionally perceptive, even if internally they may still have an emotional chaos going on. They experience deep satisfaction in how you respond to them, right? Because mostly these are the folks that are seeking validation above everything else, and they have chosen a pro-social way of attaining that, right?
Yeah, it seems like it's like the codependent kind of like side. I get it's very, very similar in so many different ways, but is that kind of more along those lines?
Yes, I mean, we could argue that the codependents, that's their narcissistic wound. And so therefore they are a perfect match, or because they are the other side of the coin to either the antisocial narcissist or the malignant narcissist, which I'll explain. So we have the antisocial narcissist, and there's some overlap, at least in terms of diagnostic criteria. This is someone who might have a presentation of antisocial personality and narcissistic personality. But let's say this is someone who has narcissistic wounding who leans more towards antisocial presentation. So their tagline would be like, I'm better than you, so you owe me, right? So these are folks that can be very difficult to deal with. They're very self-centered and they expect a lot from people in their lives. They're very entitled. They're arrogant and they will do whatever it takes to get what they want. These folks are less likely to have long-term relationships and they don't feel limited by the truth. But when they are caught in a lie, they can get pretty angry about it. They sort of, they see the social landscape as a big competition and they are there to win it. I would say it's also worth noting that these particular antisocial narcissists, they're more likely to demonstrate recklessness and impulsivity than the other types. They also don't require the same degree of admiration, and they don't necessarily envy others in the same way that the other types do. So that kind of differentiates them a little bit. Then we have the malignant narcissist. This is the kind that when we think of the word narcissist, like this is the subtype that most people imagine. So this is, their tagline would be, I don't care what it takes, I get what I want, and the ends justifies the means, right? So these are folks that can have long-term relationships. And they often have a very hidden kind of secret life going on, like within them and sometimes even like in their lives, right? But their behavior can appear consistent for a long time at first, and then it becomes unstable. So they tend to be more attention seeking. They tend to care more about what other people think. They have a strong need to protect an inflated self-image, and they get really upset if someone offers them like a constructive criticism, right? They will take it as an offense or as an affront. They can misuse or exploit relationships for their own gain. These are the folks who will gaslight you to make you doubt your own feelings and limitations. They are, and similarly, they are more likely to be manipulative and strategically so, right? They can become angry and aggressive if they do feel like they are threatened, but they will do this in a more calculated way. It's less impulsive. And so these are actually also, this is also the category that is often compared to like psychopaths, more so than any other type of narcissist. But what differentiates them is they will feel some guilt and shame when they are lying or when they're breaking the rules, whereas a psychopath will not feel that. And then the last one is probably one that people have also heard about. These are the vulnerable or the covert narcissists. So this is the tagline for this type is, I'm special, but nobody recognizes it, right? So the vulnerable or the covert narcissist deep down believes they are superior, but they keep that belief kind of hidden inside. They're very self-absorbed. They feel that they deserve more attention than they get. So as a result, they feel like victimized a lot of the time. It's just because nobody recognizes my specialness or my brilliance. And so, it works for everybody else, but not for me, right? Like I'm the special exception to every rule, even if it's working against me, right? Mm-hmm. So these narcissists, they can be highly sensitive, but that sensitivity doesn't really extend to other people's feelings. They can present as very depressed, even as they are expressing like a powerful contempt for other people. They don't have a lot of emotional maturity. Right. And I think this is the paradox of a lot of people who struggle with narcissistic wounding profoundly is they are incredibly emotionally perceptive, and yet inside there's a chaos going on, when it comes to their emotions. So that's kind of like the 4 subtypes. How does that intersect with attachment styles? Well, so these subtypes of, let's say, narcissistic characteristics or presentations can show up in either presentation. So for example, you might have a people-pleasing, pro-social narcissist who is actually more avoidant because they are crafting a very carefully cultivated persona that advocates for the underdog, right? And while they are advocating for the underdog, they are keeping intimate, close relationships at a distance because it's a lot easier to bond to a cause or to a large group of people than it is to be in an intimate situation one-on-one with someone, right? So we might argue that they are actually implementing avoidance strategies while appearing to be very pro-social, right? Very approachable, but only in a very carefully cultivated persona, right? In a certain, very curated kind of way. Equally, you could have, let's say, someone who's a people-pleasing, pro-social, narcissistic presentation who is of a more anxious disposition. And maybe these are the folks who really cling to the people that they advocate for, or who need to always have someone by their side because that provides them with a sense of validation, stability, and identity, right? Or one more example, you might say, let's say we have someone who is more avoidant and they don't decide, but they end up having a kind of, let's say, covert, vulnerable, victimized, narcissistic identity, right? So then they use that kind of victimization to justify their avoidant behaviors. Oh, you'll just leave me in the end and you're going to blame me for your disappointment. It's better just to avoid this altogether, right? On the other hand, we could have an anxious, vulnerable narcissist who uses victimization to justify their clinging. Look how much you hurt me. If you really loved me, you would step up and be what I need right now, right? So it's a provocation to work harder to be closer to me, right? To recognize the specialness that I have and that I deserve. So I feel like I gave you a long answer, but that's kind of how we might see those things intersecting.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's a like a new way, at least in my experience, of exploring this and really diving deep into that narcissistic wounding, where it came from, how it manifests. And I love all the intricacies of how it can show up differently and of course intersect with the attachment styles. So how does one recover from narcissistic wounding? What does that look like?
Sure. So I would say, going back to what we said about being very emotionally perceptive, but then having a chaos going on inside, right? So what's the most disruptive, I would say, of either recovering from narcissistic abuse or even recovering from our own narcissistic wounds is sifting and sorting through that emotional chaos on an internal level, and then trying to become aware of the subtleties of the energetic states that are moving through your body. So I'm going to explain that a bit less abstractly. So let's say when you are experiencing a narcissistic wound, or you've kind of taken in your partner's wounding, right? Because when we are in an intimate relationship, sometimes we kind of take in what our partner is struggling with energetically, almost as if by osmosis, and suddenly their wound is inside us, right? And it is burrowing its way into our own experience, right? So first of all, that can look and feel like feeling isolated, out of body experiences, feeling kind of disconnected from yourself. You might feel sometimes like you're on the outside looking in at your own life. Like, how did this happen? How did I become this person? You might freeze up or have a sense of intense fear when it seems like there's just an even benign disagreement. You might start to feel like it's difficult to make decisions for yourself. You might just have this pervasive feeling that you're doing something wrong, even though you don't know what it is that you're doing wrong. A general sense of restlessness, just being confused about who you are and what you want now. You could be unable to set boundaries, right? Not being able to say no to things that you don't really like, feeling sad or helpless or depressed, all of that. So when I say an emotional chaos, that's kind of what I mean. Like, you find yourself sort of arrived at this place. So recovering from that is, I think, really twofold. The first is building what I'm going to call a robust emotional vocabulary. And then the second thing is using that vocabulary to identify your needs and establish boundaries around them, right? So when I talk about an emotional vocabulary, when we feel emotionally dysregulated or overwhelmed, right? Or we like someone's energy is just invading and assaulting us. What happens is we start to understand our needs in a very vague and unclear way. So, and this also connects with the attachment system, right? The nervous system. So for example, let's say that there's a big change in your life. It could be a move or a job change, or let's say it's a new partner, potentially a new partner moving into your life. And you feel a lot of stimulation. There's a lot of arousal in your body. There's excitement. There's the butterflies. There's the adrenaline. There's the nervousness. There's the anticipation. There's the doubt, but then there's also the exhilaration. There's the worry, but then there's the hope, right? And so it all kind of hits you at once. But let's say you've had one of these critical and demeaning parents, and you haven't really been taught how to sift and sort through your emotions and your inner experiences with a lot of sophistication, because you just haven't had that kind of mirroring. You haven't had anyone be like, let's explore that feeling. What do you think that means for you? Like, no, none of that going on, right? So what happens is you feel all these things. You don't really know what you're feeling because you haven't been taught how to sift through that. And it's just a lot of energy moving through you. So you sort of short circuit, you fry, right? And you say, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. And then we take a label that says bad feelings and we slap it on the whole experience and we say bad, and we devolve into a survival mechanism. So either I'm bad, right? So I'm gonna downplay myself so that I can remain in proximity to what I think I need to survive, or you're bad because you're creating this discomfort within me and I can't define it. So I'm gonna move you out of my purview so that I can, survive this situation, right? So this is how we start to devolve because we don't have the language. So we fall back on our most instinctual impulse, which is the push away, fight, flight, or pull and cling, right? Fight or flight, or freeze out, dissociate, self-sabotage, in other words, right? So that means, so how do we fix that? Well, it is a practice of recognizing the body as the first organizer of experience. And this is what a lot of trauma research is telling us these days. And they've actually, a lot of research done in attachment styles show us that the hippocampus looks exactly the way it does for someone who's had significant like developmental and relational trauma, attachment trauma. It looks the same as it does for soldiers coming back from war. So what this tells us is that attachment traumas are traumas and they should be treated as such. And so that means that we need to work with embodied experiential interventions and practices to help calm the nervous system, to retrain the way it is responding to things. And incidentally, this takes 6 months to a year. People always ask me how long. It takes 6 months to a year when you're doing it in earnest, right? And then also once you do that, now you can utilize the body as like your greatest resource because it is this first organizer of experience. It is your best tool for generating energy, for receiving and processing energy, and feelings, big or small, subtle feelings, they're all energy moving through your body. So things like meditation, somatic experiencing, accelerated resolution therapy, brain spotting, EMDR, dance movement therapy, Rolfing, kinesiology, neurofeedback, biofeedback, things that stimulate the body are really going to be a helpful tool in allowing you to sift and sort through these different charges that you've got going on. And then once you're able to sift and sort and you've developed a language for, oh, this charge is coming up and it's not just bad, it's all these other things going on. Now you're more capable of making masterful choices about which feelings you're going to follow, which wolf you're going to feed, and which wolf you won't, right? Mm-hmm. There's that Native American story about you have a good wolf and a bad wolf living inside of you, and which one survives? The one you feed, right? Mm-hmm. So now once you're aware you've got this language, that means you've also got the language to identify what your real need is, right? Like now you know what you really need, and now you know how to articulate it with clarity so that a partner can actually meet you where you're at and get that need met. And you can discern when they are someone who cannot do that, right?
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I love that. The wolf analogy there. I'd never heard that before. That's absolutely. Yes. Which one will you feed? Is it going to be the wolf that's like a dog / puppy and, feeding it, or is it going to be the one that, yes, can attack you or something like that? So that's a good way of looking at it. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. I mean, you always bring such great research to the table and like fun ways to explore like terminology and just different ways of looking at things. So this has been another awesome conversation. I appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit about your free webinar you have coming up. And I know there's a button below linking over to your site. So what do you have for us?
Yes, I'm excited to share. This is a new project that we've put together. We put together a free training. It's called a framework for attracting, 3-step framework for attracting soul-shaking love. And in this framework, I'm going to talk more about how I attracted soul-shaking love into my life, and really how you do not have to be totally healed from all your insecurity and doubt before really stepping into being in relationship to someone else. We also talk about unconscious mistakes that we might make when we are trying to step into a healthier relationship. And I've made every single one of them. So definitely this is coming from a place of experience. And also I'm going to share a framework that you can use, that you can take with you after the training immediately and work and use in your relationships and expressing yourself honestly and authentically with a partner. And we're going to look at why you may want to stop consuming blogs, ebooks, scripts, and other content before watching this training. We're going to talk about the mindset that secure partners tend to have and how you can get over your obstacles in order to adopting that mindset. And we're going to talk about 7 essential steps that will help you step into a more conscious lover's journey, right? And evolving and recovering from things like narcissistic wounding and insecure attachment styles.
Awesome. Well, that sounds amazing. Thank you for offering that to everyone here at AVAIYA. And again, everyone, the button's below for that webinar. Any last insights before we wrap up?
I think if there's one thing I would leave you with, it is that relationships are really not supposed to be hard work. You know, relationships are intended to be a refuge from work. Relationships are intended to add to your life, not make you feel like you have to run around like a chicken with your head cut off to make it work, right? And I didn't believe that myself until it happened to me. And so I want to maybe, leave you on that hopeful note that it is possible. And that you get to have that. You're fully deserving of that, and sometimes it might feel like a big journey from here to there, but as long as you just focus on that little step right in front of you, you'll be fine.
Right.
It'll unfold.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with us again today, Briana. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, AVAIYA students watching or listening right now, for showing up for yourself today and going through this journey as courageously as you are. And we will see you all again very soon. Take care. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this latest class with Briana MacWilliam. She was back with us today to talk about attachment styles as narcissistic wounds, remembering the self. I really enjoy talking to Briana. I think she does a great job of bringing many different things into our conversation. She talks a lot about research. She talks about different modalities. She talks about like fun terminology and ways we can look at our relationships in different ways. And I really enjoyed talking about the different ways that the narcissistic wounding shows up and how that links into these different attachment styles. So I thought that was really great. I hope you found that helpful. And also the talk of, right, which wolf are you feeding? I think that was a great thing to think about in your own life, because of course, right, if we're feeding the wolf that is going to, right, give us kisses and keep us safe and be a companion, then that seems like that's a great wolf to feed, as opposed to the wolf that's going to, right, sabotage us, ruin relationships, what have you. So I thought that was a fun way of looking at it, and just a thing to be aware of in your own life, in your own relationships. I hope you found this helpful. We will see you all again very soon. Take care.
AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.